We thought we'd planned everything perfectly, a weekend to disconnect, escape the grind, and reconnect with nature. Pine Hollow National Park was sprawling, with well-trodden trails winding through towering evergreens and wildflower meadows. Sam, Brooke, Kevin, and I had all agreed it would be the perfect getaway, challenging but rewarding. Raven's Peak, our destination, promised sweeping views, crisp mountain air, and silence. What we didn't plan for was him, the tramp of the woods. It started subtly, as these things often do. The first time I noticed him, it was mid-morning. We'd been hiking for a few hours already, the trail winding uphill. The sun filtered through the canopy, dappling the ground with shifting patches of gold. Sam led the group, his boundless energy pulling us forward, while Kevin brought up the rear, cracking jokes about how leisurely we were going. I stopped to adjust my boot and glanced behind us. There, far back along the trail, was a figure. At first, I thought it was another hiker. They were tall and thin, with a large pack slung over one shoulder. But something about the way they stood was off. Too still, like a mannequin propped up in the middle of the woods. "Hey, you guys see that?" I called, pointing toward the figure. Sam shielded his eyes from the sun. "What? The trees?" "No, back there. On the trail." Kevin squinted but shook his head. "You're seeing things, man." Brooke, however, lingered a moment longer. "There's something there," she said hesitantly, her voice barely audible. Sam dismissed it with a wave. "Probably some hikers stopping for a break. Let's keep moving." But as we continued, the nagging feeling stuck with me. The second time was after lunch. We'd stopped by a small stream to refill our water bottles and eat. The babbling brook masked most of the forest's usual sounds, but I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched. As we packed up to leave, I scanned the tree line. There he was again. This time, he wasn't on the trail. He stood further back, partially obscured by a large pine. The distance made it hard to see clearly, but the shape of him was unmistakable. "Okay, that's weird," Brooke said, following my gaze. Kevin turned, frowning. "What now?" Brooke pointed. "That guy. Over there." Kevin stepped forward, squinting into the distance. "I don't see anyone." "He's right there." Brooke snapped, frustration lacing her voice. "Behind the tree." But by the time Kevin focused, the figure was gone. The unease deepened as the day wore on. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of the tramp, always at the edge of my vision, always gone when I tried to focus. The others started noticing too. Brooke became increasingly jumpy, her head snapping around at the slightest sound. Even Sam, usually the skeptic, seemed quieter than usual. By the time we reached the base of Raven's Peak, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the forest floor. We found a clearing to set up camp, a flat patch surrounded by thick trees, and tried to settle in for the night. As we worked, Kevin broke the silence. "So, we're all seeing it, right?" No one answered right away. Sam finally sighed. "I mean, yeah, I've seen something. But it's probably just another hiker. This is a popular trail." "That doesn't explain why he's always watching us," Brooke said, her voice trembling. "He hasn't done anything," Sam argued. "Maybe he's just curious. Or lost." "Lost?" I repeated, incredulous. "If he's lost, why hasn't he called out for help? Why doesn't he come closer?" That shut Sam up. We tried to carry on as if everything was normal, building a fire and cooking dinner. The warmth and light were comforting, but the woods beyond the flames felt like a living thing, teeming with shadows and unseen eyes. It was Kevin who spotted him first that night. "Guys," he hissed, pointing. The tramp stood at the edge of the clearing, just outside the ring of firelight. This was the closest he'd ever been. His form was sharper now, more distinct, long, spindly arms that hung almost to his knees, legs so thin they looked like sticks. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on us. Brooke whimpered, clutching my arm. "Who the hell are you?" Sam shouted, rising to his feet. "What do you want?" The tramp didn't move. Kevin grabbed the flashlight and shone it toward the figure. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, but there was nothing there. "What the?" Kevin started, but he was cut off by a sound. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed through the woods, circling us. Panic set in. Brooke insisted we pack up and leave immediately, but Sam refused. "It's dark," he said. "If we leave now, we'll get lost. We're not staying here." Brooke snapped. Kevin nodded. "She's right. Whatever that thing is, it's not normal." But Sam wouldn't budge. "Look, we're safer here. Let's just stay close to the fire, keep watch in shifts. At first light, we'll hike out." No one was happy about it, but eventually, we agreed. The night was long and suffocating. The fire crackled, sending up showers of sparks, but it did little to dispel the oppressive darkness. Brooke and I took the first watch while Kevin and Sam tried to sleep. We didn't speak much, just stared out into the trees, straining to see any sign of movement. At some point, I dozed off. When I woke, the fire had burned low, casting faint, flickering light across the clearing. Brooke was gone. Panic hit me like ice water. Brooke was gone, and the forest felt alive with the weight of her absence. "Brooke?" I hissed, sitting up. My voice seemed swallowed by the darkness. I grabbed the flashlight and swept it around the clearing. The others stirred at the noise, Kevin groaned, and Sam blinked groggily at me. "What's going on?" Sam muttered, his voice thick with sleep. "Brooke's gone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That woke them up. Kevin shot to his feet, his eyes darting around the shadows. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "I don't know," I snapped. "I just woke up, and she's not here." Sam groaned, rubbing his face. "She probably just went to pee." "Calm down. Without waking anyone? Without her flashlight?" I shot back. Kevin was already grabbing his boots. "We need to find her." The three of us fanned out, staying within earshot of each other. The flashlight's beam sliced through the darkness, revealing endless rows of trees, their branches clawing at the sky. "Brooke!" I called, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. The woods gave no reply. Every sound made my heart race, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant hoot of an owl, the wind whispering through the trees. But there was no sign of Brooke. After about 15 minutes, we regrouped back at the camp. Sam looked genuinely worried now, his earlier confidence eroded. Kevin's face was pale, his hands trembling as he spoke. "She wouldn't just leave," he said, almost to himself. "Not like this." I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. That's when we heard it, a faint sound, like someone whimpering, coming from deeper in the woods. Kevin was the first to react. "That's her," he said, already moving toward the noise. "Wait!" I hissed, grabbing his arm. "It could be a trap." "A trap?" Sam repeated, incredulous. "I don't know, okay? But something's not right about any of this." Kevin shook me off, his face set in determination. "If that's her, we can't just leave her out there." Against my better judgment, I followed. We moved cautiously, the sound growing louder as we approached. It led us to a small clearing, where the moonlight filtered through the trees, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. At first, I didn't see anything. But then my flashlight landed on a figure sitting against a tree. "Brooke!" Kevin shouted, rushing forward. I grabbed his shoulder, stopping him just in time. The figure looked like Brooke, same hoodie, same ponytail, but something was wrong. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her arms hung limp at her sides. "Brooke?" I called softly. She didn't respond. As we edged closer, the flashlight revealed the truth. It wasn't Brooke. The figure was made of twigs and branches, crudely lashed together in the shape of a person. Her hoodie and jeans hung on the effigy like skin draped over a skeleton. Her face was a carved wooden mask, blank and expressionless. Kevin stumbled back, swearing. "What the hell is this?" Sam whispered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, the sound of footsteps surrounded us again, slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy. The tramp was here. We turned as one, the flashlight's beam swinging wildly through the trees. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, he stepped into the clearing. I couldn't breathe. The tramp was impossibly tall, his limbs grotesquely long and thin. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. His clothes were ragged and filthy, hanging off him like the skin of a molted snake. He didn't move, but the air around him seemed to thrum with menace. "Run," I whispered. Kevin didn't need to be told twice. He took off back toward the camp, with Sam and me right behind him. The woods were a blur as we sprinted, the tramp's footsteps echoing behind us. They didn't match the rhythm of ours, they were slower, heavier, as if he didn't need to run to keep up. When we finally reached the camp, Kevin collapsed by the fire, gasping for air. Sam grabbed a burning stick and held it like a weapon, his hands trembling. "What do we do?" Kevin panted. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to leave. Now." "And go where?" Sam snapped. "We're miles from the car, and he's faster than us." The footsteps stopped. Silence fell over the camp, heavy and suffocating. "Do you hear that?" Kevin whispered. Nothing. No footsteps. No wind. Even the insects had gone quiet. I turned slowly, my flashlight sweeping the trees. He was standing at the edge of the clearing again, closer than ever before. This time, I saw his face, or what passed for one. It was a twisted mockery of a human face, with hollow eyes and a wide, toothless grin carved into what looked like bark. His head tilted unnaturally, as if sizing us up. Then, he raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at me. I froze as the tramp pointed at me, his crooked limb impossibly long, the gesture deliberate and final. My legs felt like lead, my breath hitching in shallow gasps. Kevin grabbed my arm, breaking the spell. "We have to go," he hissed. "Where?" I whispered back. My eyes stayed locked on the tramp as if looking away would give him the opportunity to close the gap between us. "Anywhere but here." Kevin snapped. Sam still clutched the burning stick, his knuckles white. "We can't just run blindly. We'll get lost, or worse." "Worse than this?" Kevin shouted, gesturing wildly at the thing in the woods. The tramp's arm lowered, and he took a single, deliberate step forward. The sound of his footfall reverberated through the clearing, low and heavy, like the creak of an ancient tree swaying. That was all it took. We bolted. The firelight disappeared behind us as we tore through the forest. The tramp's footsteps followed, slow and methodical, but somehow always keeping pace. It didn't make sense. No matter how fast we ran, the sound never faded. "Where's the trail?" Kevin yelled, panic rising in his voice. "I don't know." Sam shouted back, his flashlight bouncing wildly. "Just keep moving." The trees closed in around us, their twisted branches clawing at our clothes and skin. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed for rest, but stopping wasn't an option. Then, without warning, Kevin tripped. He hit the ground hard, his flashlight skittering into the underbrush. "Kevin!" I screamed, skidding to a halt. Sam and I rushed to help him up, but Kevin pushed us away, scrambling to his feet. "I'm fine. Keep going." But it was too late. The tramp stood directly in our path. This was the closest I'd seen him, and the sight was worse than I could have imagined. His head was too large for his thin frame, tilted slightly as if he were studying us. The bark-like texture of his face twisted in a grotesque grin, his hollow eyes glowing faintly with a sickly yellow light. His body seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, flickering like an old film reel, as though he were not entirely there. Kevin screamed, grabbing the nearest rock and hurling it at the tramp. The rock passed through him, shattering against a tree behind him. The tramp tilted his head further, almost amused, and took another step forward. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Kevin back. We veered off the trail, or what little was left of it, plunging deeper into the forest. The woods seemed to shift around us, the trees becoming denser and more oppressive. No matter which way we turned, it felt as if we were going in circles. My flashlight flickered, the beam growing weaker with each passing second. Then we saw it, a small, weathered cabin nestled among the trees. "It's shelter," Sam said, his voice breathless. "It's a trap," Kevin countered. But the tramp's footsteps were growing louder, closer. We didn't have a choice. The door to the cabin creaked as we shoved it open and piled inside. The interior was sparse, a single room with a wooden table, a rusted stove, and a cot in the corner. A window above the table offered a narrow view of the forest outside. Sam barricaded the door with a chair, while Kevin slumped against the wall, his face pale. "What now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We wait," Sam said, though he didn't sound confident. The tramp's footsteps stopped just outside the cabin. The silence was deafening. My ears strained for any sound, my heart hammering in my chest. Then, slowly, the door handle began to turn. "Hold it!" Sam hissed, throwing his weight against the barricade. The door rattled violently, the chair groaning under the strain. Kevin grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the stove and held it like a weapon, his hands shaking. "Go away!" I screamed, though my voice cracked with fear. The rattling stopped. For a moment, I thought we'd won. But then, a loud crack echoed through the cabin. The window shattered inward, and a long, gnarled arm reached through, its bark-like skin scraping against the frame. Kevin swung the skillet with all his strength, slamming it into the arm. The tramp recoiled with an unnatural screech, the sound reverberating in my skull. But the reprieve was brief. The cabin shuddered as something heavy slammed against the wall, splintering the wood. "We can't stay here," I shouted. "Where do we go?" Sam yelled back. Before anyone could answer, the wall caved in. The tramp loomed over the debris, his hollow eyes glowing with malevolent light. He stepped into the cabin, his frame impossibly large in the confined space. Kevin screamed and swung the skillet again, but the tramp caught it mid-swing, his long fingers curling around the metal. He wrenched it from Kevin's grasp and flung it aside. "Out the back!" Sam yelled, grabbing my arm. We scrambled through the debris and into the night, the tramp's guttural screech following us. The forest seemed endless, the trees pressing closer with each step. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but adrenaline kept me moving. Kevin tripped again, this time staying down. "Leave me," he gasped. "Go." "No way!" I shouted, hauling him to his feet. But when I looked up, I realized Sam was gone. "Sam?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer. The forest was silent again, the oppressive weight returning. Kevin and I clung to each other, our flashlights flickering weakly. Then we saw him, Sam, standing perfectly still ahead of us. "Sam!" I cried, relief flooding through me. But as we approached, something was wrong. Sam didn't move, didn't turn to look at us. His head tilted unnaturally, his arms hanging limply at his sides. I shone my flashlight on him and screamed. Sam wasn't standing. He was suspended, his body lashed to a tree with vines, his face frozen in a twisted expression of terror. Behind him, the tramp emerged from the shadows, his hollow eyes locking onto us. "Run," Kevin whispered. But I couldn't move. The tramp raised his arm, pointing at me again, his grin widening. And then everything went black. When I woke, the world was wrong. The forest no longer looked like a place of nature but a twisted mockery of it. The trees were darker, their branches gnarled and reaching like skeletal hands. The ground was damp and cold, and a thick fog crept between the trunks, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Kevin was nowhere to be seen. I sat up, my head pounding, the events from before flooding back. The tramp, the cabin, Sam lashed to a tree. My flashlight was gone, and the pale light filtering through the fog seemed to come from nowhere. "Kevin?" I called, my voice trembling. It barely carried, swallowed by the oppressive silence. A rustling sound came from behind me. I turned sharply, my heart pounding. "Kevin?" No answer. The rustling grew louder, closer. My instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I could feel it before I saw it, the oppressive presence that had been haunting us since the hike began. The tramp emerged from the fog, his crooked form towering over me. His hollow eyes burned faintly, his grin wider now, stretched impossibly across his bark-like face. "Stay back!" I screamed, scrambling to my feet. He didn't move. Instead, he raised his long arm again and pointed at me. This time, his gesture was different, almost beckoning. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. "No! Leave me alone!" The tramp tilted his head, his body flickering like a broken film reel. The air around him seemed to hum, heavy with something I couldn't explain. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Come." My blood ran cold. The word wasn't spoken aloud. It echoed inside my head, hollow and resonant, like a voice carried through a deep cavern. "Come." I turned and ran, ignoring the sharp branches that tore at my arms and face. The tramp's whisper followed me, growing louder, more insistent. The forest twisted and turned, the trees seeming to shift as I ran. No matter which direction I chose, the path never led anywhere. Finally, I stumbled into another clearing. At its center was an ancient-looking stone well, its edges worn smooth by time. The fog seemed to pool around it, thick and impenetrable. Something about the well felt wrong, wrong in a way I couldn't put into words. I backed away, but the tramp was there, stepping out of the fog to block my retreat. His grin had disappeared, replaced by something worse, an expressionless void. "Come," the voice echoed again, louder this time. "No!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his arm and pointed toward the well. I shook my head, refusing to move. But the air grew heavier, pressing down on me like a physical weight. My legs buckled, forcing me to my knees. The tramp stepped closer, his hollow eyes burning brighter. "Stop!" I begged, tears streaming down my face. But he didn't stop. His arm remained outstretched, commanding. I crawled toward the well, every instinct screaming at me to stop, to run, to fight. But I couldn't resist the pull. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping until I could no longer understand them. When I reached the edge of the well, I looked down. The darkness inside was alive, swirling and shifting like an ocean in a storm. Shapes moved within it, too fast to see, too terrifying to comprehend. The tramp stood over me now, his arm lowering as his hollow eyes bore into mine. "Come." Something shifted in the darkness below. A long, thin arm reached up from the depths, its clawed fingers grasping for me. I screamed, scrambling back, but the tramp's gnarled hand closed around my shoulder, holding me in place. His strength was inhuman, his grip like iron. The arm from the well wrapped around my ankle, its icy touch searing into my skin. It pulled, dragging me toward the edge. "No! Please!" I screamed, clawing at the ground. The tramp tilted his head, watching silently as I was dragged closer. I fought with everything I had, but the pull was relentless. My fingers slipped, the edge of the well growing closer. The whispers became deafening, a storm of voices screaming inside my head. And then, with one final pull, I was dragged into the darkness. The fall felt endless. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light, it was a living, breathing entity, wrapping itself around me, suffocating me. The whispers faded, replaced by a deep, resonant silence. I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't feel. I was weightless, suspended in an infinite void. Then, a voice spoke. Not a whisper this time, but a booming, all-encompassing roar that shook the very fabric of my being. You belong to the woods now. When I woke, I was back on the trail, alone. The sun was rising, its warm light cutting through the trees. My clothes were torn and bloodied, my body aching as though I'd been beaten. There was no sign of Kevin, Sam, or Brooke. No sign of the tramp. But I could feel him. Even now, as I write this, I can feel his hollow eyes watching me from the shadows. He's always there, waiting. And I know one thing for certain, I'll never leave the woods.